Welcome to Phishing for Answers. The opinions expressed here are solely those of the individuals involved and do not reflect the views of their employers. Get ready, because the next live episode of Phishing for Answers is starting right now with your host, Joshua Krumbaugh, the CEO of Fish Firewall.
Psychology is the new firewall, where human insight trumps every trick. We're not hacking systems, we're hacking behavior, so you won't click.
Hello, welcome to another episode of Phishing for Answers. Today, I'm here with Michael Lines. He is a global CISO. Michael, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thank you, Joshua. So, brief background on myself. I've been in cybersecurity for 25 years now. During that time, I've been the CISO for PricewaterhouseCoopers, the global CISO for them, for TransUnion, the credit bureau for FICO, the data analytics company, as well as SaaS startups. So I've had a lot of experience in from the very small to the very large in terms of creating information security programs, as well as being a advisory services practice leader for some international advisory services companies that deal in cybersecurity. So I had the experience of dealing with cybersecurity from both sides of the desk, if you will. And it's been an exciting journey and quite an evolution over the past 25 years.
That's a fascinating and quite impressive background, I might say. So let's just jump right into it then. What are some of the things that stand out the most over the years, particularly as it pertains to the human element in cybersecurity?
Well, certainly there's been an evolution over the past 25 years in terms of the risk value, if you will, of cybersecurity. I mean, previously when I started out, it was seen as a technology function, network engineering buried within the IT organization. And that has grown over the years to becoming its own domain and having higher and higher levels of reporting responsibility and visibility to senior leadership and to the board and so on. That, of course, is obviously driven by the explosive growth in threats and attacks against organizations leveraging cyber vulnerabilities, and the fact that companies, have to deal with this as a business level risk, not just a strictly technology risk. Associated with that also is the fact that as this threat environment has grown, the recognition of the damage that it can cause to organizations has grown. Laws, regulations have grown along with them. So, basically 25 years ago, it was very thin in terms of what the requirements were. I mean, there was NIST 853, there was ISO standards back then, but there was not the rigor in terms of mandating those that existed today. Now it is obviously much more rigorous. It seems like every day there's a new framework that's popping up, or 50 new controls that are added to existing frameworks. And, as a result of that, a lot of organizations, and certainly a lot of CISOs are on what I call the compliance hamster wheel, constantly chasing, or trying to achieve compliance against all these different requirements, whether security requirements, privacy requirements. And as a result of that, they've lost sight of the forest for all the trees, if you will.
Yeah. That's why I think it's critical to just focus on best practices.
Mm-hmm.
If we do everything the best we possibly can, make it as secure as we possibly can, most of that compliance falls in line. And it can take you off of that hamster wheel a little bit. But I do agree. I think too often compliance, maybe not as much by the CISOs, but certainly by the rest of the organization, compliance is seen as the finish line. Mm-hmm. And if anything, it's the starting line. When you look at it, it's the bare minimum we're supposed to be doing, not the, hey, this is everything that we want to have. And I think that there's a bit of a difference in mindset there. But yeah, no, absolutely, I agree with you completely. What about on the user side, fostering more of a culture of security? What are some things that have stood out there around how you build more security resilient cultures?
Again, I think it has to do with that evolution of the awareness of risk associated with cybersecurity. Again, 25 years ago, this was a technology function and technology issue to be addressed. And now, and certainly over the past 15 years, past decade, there's much more awareness of the threat that email poses. Matter of fact, it is the main threat into organizations these days and has been documented by all the statistics in terms of how attackers are getting into organizations. Whether for the scraping of credentials or the theft of credentials or introducing malware through malformed messages or attachments or whatever. It's so easy and so low cost for the attackers, and it works. Why wouldn't they do that? So therefore, they will use email extensively. And as a result of that, the whole security awareness function has grown along with that. So now, it's now accepted that you're going to have to go through initial security awareness training as you join an organization, and then ongoing security awareness training, and depending upon the organization, phishing training to be able to spot phishes and so forth. So that whole aspect of firewalling the user is as important as firewalling the organization.
I agree. I think you want to stop as many clicks as you possibly can, and then you want to make sure that those few clicks that do fall through onto hardened systems and networks, so that it's not going to quickly spread or escalate.
Absolutely.
So what are some of your pet peeves? This is always a fun, fascinating area, but you must have over the years developed a few, I don't know, pet peeves or things that you're very passionate about inside of cybersecurity.
Well, thank you for asking, because there actually is a few things that that are bees in my bonnet, if you will. And probably the biggest one I would say is the concept of risk and the application of risk in cybersecurity, and how it is used and abused, if you will, within organizations. Quite often, I rarely find that risk is being done properly within organizations. It is done as a checklist exercise. Oh, hey, the regulators or the framework that we're using says we've got to do a risk assessment. So boom, boom, boom. Let's, imagine some scenarios, apply risk ratings that we just, pull out of the wind. And then, okay, there's our risk assessment. And it's like, this is this standalone document and exercise. And how does that relate to what your information security program is and what it is that why you actually exist? As a result of that, that actually prompted me a couple of years ago to write a book on the process called Heuristic Risk Management, focused on, if you think of what a heuristic is, it is basically a shortcut approach to solving a problem that is, 80 to 90% effective, but gets you the answer quickly, as opposed to wasting your time trying to achieve perfection that does not give you any significantly different answer that you would have gotten in the first place. And I think that type of approach, looked at from a risk concept, is what all CISOs need to be doing. And far too many CISOs have lost sight of, as they're either on the compliance hamster wheel, or associated with that, they're on the technology hamster wheel, which is basically chasing the latest technologies to address all these narrower and narrower vulnerabilities and threats that exist within their environment. Well, at the same time, they've got Windows 2000 servers still sitting in their environment. They've got and I've gone into the largest corporations in the world, and I've seen these problems where they have these huge, elaborate policies and procedures and technologies, and it's like, is that Windows XP I see running over there? What the hell is it?
No, it's 3.1.
Yeah.
I've seen it too, particularly with pen testing. It was amazing, some of the stuff that we would find, and still exposed, and barely any mitigating controls on some of it.
Mm-hmm.
I agree, and it's not just that; it's also hardening the systems that you do have. Before I go buy a bunch of security tools, I think, it's good to just start with a little bit of group policy to lock down what we have in our existing
Mhm.
network.
Yeah, the CIS, or the Center for Internet Security, is your friend. Any
Yes.
CISO that does not have that as the number one bookmark in their browser, I would question if they really understand what they're doing, because there are so many tools that they provide that are the basic fundamentals, whether
Yeah.
it's hardening standards, whether it's policies, whether it is the CIS, top 18, which is constantly evolving, used to be the top 20. But basically, the controls that matter, as opposed to the controls that are the hypotheticals of, well, this could go wrong, do this could go wrong, do that, as opposed to, these are the things that, based on our analysis of the Verizon, DBR and all the other threat analyses, this is what actually happened. This is what attackers are attacking. Fix this if you don't want to be, on that list as well.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. And I will add to that that just the simple act of hardening protects you against most of those 0
Mhm.
days that all these tools are going to protect you against. When I look at them, I mean, more often than not, the 0 days, once we hear about them, and I guess they're not a 0 day anymore, but they were,
Mhm.
they're relying on default configurations. Now, not always, but most of the time they are. And so if we just go in and we lock things down a little bit, it really does help immensely. But I don't think it's just hardening our systems. I also see hardening as a process that we have to do with our people too. And that means making sure that they are aware of the threats that they're going to face in their day to day job, that they know how to protect against them, and that they just understand that security is part of their job function, regardless of what their actual job is. Security is everyone's. Well, I have one guest that came on here, and she had stated that they had switched from telling everybody, "Hey, security is everyone's responsibility," to "Security is your responsibility." And I loved it. I was like, "Okay, I'm using that from now on." But I think it's just it has to be part of that culture, and that's hardening your people so that they're not making these careless mistakes. And a lot of times these breaches are as simple as a USB drive being left at a coffee shop.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's why, social pen testing is an important part of any organization's pen testing responsibilities. It's not just, running scans against your external perimeter. It's the fact that you got to actually test your people. You got to test your doors. You got to drop USB sticks. You got to do impersonate, coming in as the vending machine refill guy and plugging a potty phone into a wall somewhere. All those things are part of the human element of pen testing that needs to occur on a regular basis. But what you were talking about, I think, is another important function, and that is the CISO as a cultural change agent, which I think a lot of CISOs don't really see as their role, or they don't recognize that as their role, but it needs to be, because they've got to change the perception of security across all in the entirety of the organization, from the people that are basically the help desk on one level, to the engineers, to the developers, to the executives, to the salespeople, to the marketing people, the finance people. Everybody has to understand security in the context of what it means to them.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is often quite lacking, because quite often what you will see is CISOs immediately, generally when they join an organization, their hair is on fire to begin with, or at least it's smoldering. So they're immediately off running,
It's
chasing
true.
whatever the current challenge of the day is, whether they've got to achieve compliance with some regulation, or they've got to address some specific security need in order to make a significant sale to a customer. Whatever it is, there's always some distraction or multiple distractions that are driving their agenda. And as a result of that, cultural change agent probably is pretty far down on their list in terms of priorities, but it's an important one, because it is the foundation that you need to be successful long term. So that doesn't mean you walk in and, ignore the fires in front of you, but you've got to make time for planting the seeds for your future success.
Yeah, that's really great advice. So along those lines, there is very much a social aspect of cybersecurity leadership. Talk to me a little bit about that aspect and maybe some of the things that have been eye-opening for you along the way.
Well, I think it has to do with, you need to build relationships. I mean, that's said quite often, but I think is often neglected. But what that means is, you as a CISO need to go sit in the CFO's office. You need to go sit in the CRO's office. You need to understand first and foremost, you need to know why the organization exists. What is its mission? Who are their customers? Who are their key suppliers? What is their key data? And the only way you're really going to get the right answer and the true answer is if you go to the people that actually own those functions and those responsibilities. If you don't, basically you're just going to be seen as, part of IT or part of risk and isolated, if you will, to being one of those back office functions. And if you don't get the opportunity to start to establish those relationships before you need them, then you're not going to find that they're there when you actually do need them, which is to say when you do have a ransomware scare, you do have a third party breach scare where you've actually got to engage scales, you've got to engage your marketing function, you've got your PR function, because you've got to reach out to your customers. That's not the time to establish the relationships you need. You need to do all that up front.
I would take it another step and even argue that if I want people to care, if I want them to come to me instead of trying to go around me, those relationships are critical. And I see often where security is thought of as this roadblock, this obstacle, this department that just gets in the way. And what inevitably happens, people try to work around security so that they don't have to bring them in and deal with it. And while, I guess there's people that be like, well, we'll just force it. We can only do so many audits a year, and we can't have the pen test today and then all this shadow IT popping up tomorrow because we didn't work with the organization right. And so I do think that's part of it, is making them want to come to you. And one of the recurring themes that I've heard a lot is CISOs talking about how we've got to be a business enabler.
Right.
And we've got to understand what is, how the business makes money, what are the critical functions of the business, because at the end of the day, cybersecurity is a cost center. It's not a product. At least for most of us, it's not a product unless you have a cybersecurity company.
No, that's absolutely true. And I think you can make an effective argument for why cybersecurity is a business enabler, but you've got to have those one-on-one conversations with sales. You've got to have those one-on-one conversations with marketing, because you've got to craft your message in the way that makes sense to them. For sales, for example, the fact that if we're a more secure company than our competitors, if we have these, if we have SOC 2, if we have these certifications, this is a sales advantage in terms of meeting the needs of customers that are concerned about giving us their data as opposed to giving it to, our competition. If we can say basically, hey, look at them, they don't even have any of these certifications. They're obviously not going to treat your data with the degree of security and respect that it requires. And that security can become an advantage to the company in terms of their sales and their marketing.
Or a detriment from sales and marketing perspective. I've seen I've been engaged so many times when I used to do consulting, not by the cybersecurity team, but by the sales or the marketing or the C-suite, because of the fact that they just lost a deal to somebody else who had those questions answered, and they wanted to have that document they could hand to their clients that says, hey, we care about your cybersecurity.
Right. I mean, it is table stakes these days.
It
If you
is.
look at especially larger companies that have well-defined procurement functions, I mean, they've got a fairly thick questionnaire of things that they want to get answered, and you better have an appropriate answer for each one of those.
Yeah. I'm telling you, these questionnaires, every year they take longer and longer to fill out, and they become more and more of a bottleneck because we're working with all kinds of companies, and being a cybersecurity vendor, I mean, we just see, I don't know, there's so many per week. And they're getting a lot smarter. It's not just yes or no. It's yes or no. Now show me evidence. And they're asking questions that, well, I wouldn't think to ask. Like my favorite question that I got asked so far was whether we had harmonics filters on the income and around the power lines going in and out of our data center.
Yes.
And I'm like, well, we're in the cloud. I don't know. I have to call
Right.
people. But that was certainly one that I found interesting. But I mean, depending on what you do, and a lot of these organizations that I work with, they do things that require a very high availability, and so that they may need that. It's just what we do, we don't need harmonics filters on our.
Yeah, and I think that's also another example of the evolution or de-evolution, if you will, of security. Is just like with compliance frameworks and the fact that that is ever growing and ever expanding. The verification of those ever growing and ever expanding list of requirements, even when it's not applicable at all and it's not addressing the real risk in terms of engaging with this third party, and are they going to expose your organization's data or processing or whatever to any degree of significant cyber risk. It's a challenge. I mean, the pendulum seems to swing from nothing or very little to complete overkill. And obviously then you need to try and drag it back, or do the best you can to work with your potential client and then basically say, here are the things that matter. Let me give you my answers to the things that matter. Here's the attestation, the third-party verification of our answers relative to this. Harmonic filters, well, we're going to put that aside, and we're not going to answer that.
Yeah, no, and we had a junior analyst on it, and they're like, what is this? And so we had to explain it, and I was like, man, I mean, when years ago, I wouldn't have even known what that was until I ran into a buddy that did exactly that type of research for the DOE. And when you're in the offensive circles, you run into other people. But anyway, we digress. Let's swap or switch subjects here a little bit, or change gears. Artificial intelligence is just mind-boggling how smart it is these days. What excites you the most about the future as it pertains to AI?
Well, one of the things that I do these days is I also advise startups in terms of their product pitch and messaging and my opinions relative to the viability of their product idea. So for some reason, I seem to spend the majority of my time dealing with Israeli startups. I guess my name got passed around. So there's over a dozen that I'm talking with right now. And certainly AI and the incorporation of AI into the cybersecurity suite of tools is what everybody seems to be focused on. Because there is a lot of potential there to basically make the tools that exist today more effective. But I think there is also the danger, if you will, of over engineering, over analyzing the problem, just as has happened with everything else we were just talking about, whether it's compliance, whether it's the tool set, and so forth. But the genie's not going back in the bottle. AI is here to stay. We were just talking about before the call here how we're both personally using AI for our business needs, and just what I've seen happen in the past year is mind blowing in terms of the effectiveness, the growth of the effectiveness of the AI tools. 18 months ago it was 2 plus 2 equals 4, and now it's integral calculus. So
Yeah, I mean, it's true, and it's right. And well, I mean, yeah, you're right. A year ago, it couldn't count how many R's are in strawberry. uh, but it's to me, I think one of the more fascinating aspects is just that this was at all an accident. And we were just trying to make better autocomplete. And
mhm.
next thing you know, we found out that it was able to do some really cool things. And we're like, well, wait, what if we throw images into it? And then, oh, look what happens. Well, what if we throw video into it? I really think that within just a year or two, you'll be able to go on to whatever your favorite streaming platform is, and you'll talk to it and just be like, hey, I want to watch a movie that's a comedy that's about this with these actors, and poof, you'll have a movie just like that.
Oh, I think you've probably got that today. It's just not effectively released. But even with what Apple's talking about with Apple Intelligence and the fact that they want to personalize it to you, so that basically you have your own AI chatbot that is personalized to you. It knows you, it knows your email, knows your habits, knows your calendars, knows your contacts. It's like, hey, I want to talk to George. Hey, okay, he's probably talking about this George because he has all these emails with this George. He has, this history with this George. So it doesn't even ask you; it just calls that George.
Yeah.
Uh,
Gemini's already that I wouldn't say fully there, but close. Like,
mhm,
one of my favorite features that it has is that it integrates with my calendar.
right.
And so at the beginning of the week, I'm like, okay, how many of these appointments do I have? When are they? Okay, let's develop a marketing strategy for anything that we have, any of the events we're doing. And right at the beginning of the week, as opposed to having to dig through my calendar,
Mhm.
it just goes and grabs all of that information for me. I can only imagine how much more intelligent it'll be when it has access to email. Um, but email in and of itself gets a little bit scary there. Like when it knows everything about you, what happens if that's compromised? Because now, I mean, it's easy to phish me if you have my my
Yeah,
access to my Chat GPT account, for example.
well, exactly. I mean, if you think about what APTs are all about, then the old style APT, if you will, which was actually embedding malware within the environment, monitoring the communications, and building a profile of the user. And as you say, well, gee, that's so old school. Why bother with that? I'll just go attack the LLM, and it's already done all the work for me. It tells me everything
Yeah,
about this user. So, and then from there, you can craft the perfect fish email that the user is going to click on.
yeah,
And of course, that's what the warnings that we're seeing coming from the FBI are all about. Is basically alerting everybody to the fact that phishing today is not what phishing of yesterday was. It's going to be much more sophisticated, much more tailored. It's not going to have those misspellings. It's not going to be the Nigerian prince, offering you $5 million. Please send your banking account information to them. And as a result of that, users are going to have to be much more aware, much more sophisticated. And the challenge there is, I think we're reaching the diminishing returns, if you will, of user awareness, because you can't keep educating users. We're almost educating the users to the point that they're ignoring us because it's like, stop. I can't deal with the fact that I need to treat every email, to a 10-minute analysis to determine whether it's legitimate or not. I've got to get my job done.
I agree. I think we're overcomplicating things with users, and that we've got to simplify things. I have this theory I want to run by you.
Mhm.
Uh, I call it the vaccination theory, but it's basically this. So we take weakened forms of viruses and expose them to the body in order to let the body learn how to, or teach the body how to defend
Mhm.
against it. I see phishing simulations, or really any attack simulations that we would do, as being exactly that, exposing that user to a weakened form of the virus. Now, where find it interesting is if we have really good just-in-time education, that user clicks, they fall for it, and now they learn about urgency or authority or whatever that core concept is that they need to be aware of. All of a sudden, this becomes like a definition in their subconscious. And what we found is that when people go through a simulation, they're over 70% less likely to fall for a similar simulation in the wild if they see it again.
Mhm.
And I believe that we're in sense creating human virus definitions. And when you think about the subconscious, you don't have to think to put your arm up to block your face when something flies at it. And I believe that email can be the exact same way, but we've got to simplify our training to the user. The user does not need to know about headers. They don't need to know about email authentication. They
Right.
don't need to know about even how to copy that link and throw it into VirusTotal. Every bit of that is too much to me. I think they need to know to trust their gut, and they need to learn about the common tactics that are going to be used against them.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I mean, I think there needs to be a level of inoculation, as you say, with users so that they have the basic awareness of what the threats are, what are the approaches used by the threat actors, things to look for. But if it's something that they can't do in 15 seconds, that's all you're going to get from them.
Yeah.
And beyond that, then, the technology, the AI technology has to be embedded within our email systems to be able to do the heavy lifting, as you were saying, the header analysis, the domain analysis, the linguistics of how the message is formatted, all of that for them, so they can basically say, okay, this is clearly a malicious email, or this is clearly a suspicious email. I'm going to put this in spam and say why I think this is suspicious, and let the user deal with it that way. Because you can't put it all on the user, but you can't depend entirely on technology either. But we need to leverage AI technology against AI technology to be successful.
Oh, I agree. I sort of see social engineering protection, particularly phishing protection, as being a little bit of a trinity, if you will.
Mhm.
There's three key elements to it, or legs to it. Number one, we want to stop as many malicious emails as possible from getting to the user.
Mhm.
Number two, we want to stop the user from clicking on as many malicious emails as possible.
Right.
And number three, we want to make sure that if they do click, that we've got mitigating controls in place so that it's not the end of the day, so that we don't get the company ransomed. And so I really do think it's all three to
Mhm.
have a really robust and effective program, because any one alone, you're never going to be effective, because I don't care how great your tool is. I like the way that Win Schwartau put it, that it's not digital, it's analog, because in cybersecurity, we're trying to either drive as close to one or as close to zero as we can, but we're never at one and we're never at zero.
Right. No, I mean it's layered defenses. It's the thing that you supposedly learned when you got your CSSP, which is that you always have layered defenses. You never defend. You never depend on a single protective measure, but you have your detective measures. You got your preventative measures, your responsive measures, and if you're architecting your environment correctly, you have multiple at each one of those, because something is always going to fail. The user is always going to click on the things they shouldn't click, regardless of how much you've trained them and everything else.
Yeah,
So,
that's true. And I mean, I think there's only so much that we can do, but I do think there's a lot more that we can do than what we've been doing. And I think part of the problem is that when you look at security awareness, or really even just driving a cultural around security, uh, it, the problem is that most of our expertise is not that they're not educated in communications, they're
mhm,
not educated in psychology or behavioral science, they're educated in cybersecurity.
right.
And it's what we were talking about before the show, about how everyone tends to project all of their own worldviews onto everyone around them. And what that means is that we've got a lot of cybersecurity people that give the end user more credit than maybe they should. And as a result, I think create this very technical, very in the weeds training that is going to do nothing but turn the user off and intimidate them.
Yeah, it's one of the main things that I talk about in my book, Heuristic Risk Management, is the human factors, if you will, related to cybersecurity. And it starts with, the CISO or the security leader building the critical relationships with their peers within the organization, which means not just the CIO, but the head of marketing, the head of finance, the head of sales, the CISO, the CEO and the board. And not only to understand the organization in the terms that make sense to them, but have meaning to them, which is why do we exist? How do we make money? Who are our key suppliers? What are our key systems? What is our key data? Those are things that you're not going to find out generally unless you go ask the right people, and the right people are not IT in most cases, because so you've got to go back to the source.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. Well, so we are getting a little bit short on time here, but before we do wrap it up, when it comes to the human element in general, what are some of the top tips that you would give to maybe a newer CISO or even an aspiring CISO that's just getting started?
Make those connections before you need to make them, which is, go out there and establish relationships, the key critical relationships with the business side, with the leadership side, and understand what their needs are, understand what their concerns are, understand what their opinions about security are, because it basically gives you the lever that it gives you the awareness of what it is that you need to change, because you're going to find out quite often that, security, that's, Dr. No, that's the organization that's blocking me from making sales, or that's the organization that's, causing me to do things that are wasting my time or my people's time or my staff's time. And if those are legitimate concerns, that, hey, that's an opportunity for you to have a quick organizational win to fix those problems, to make it, make security more in the background and more invisible to the user. Because at the end of the day, that's what you want security to be. You want security to be effective but invisible for the majority of the organization.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I think there's a lot of opportunities, particularly now that technology is evolving, where we can have better security around processes that are actually easier for the user.
Mm-hmm. Right.
A couple examples I love of that are passkeys, where we can tie it to biometrics. It's a better experience for the user. And the other one is, what was the other one? I'm drawing a blank. It's just right there. Okay. Drawing a blank, but
hardware tokens, maybe?
Oh, no, app stores. So one of the
Yeah.
things that we've done is even for our developers is pushed the ability or an app store that has just about anything that they'll ever want. And so it makes it real easy for them to install their own software whenever they need it, for us to maintain it, to manage it, to keep it updated. And so I think there's just things like that really do help the user, help make that experience easier for the user.
Yep.
Another thing that we did for our developers was we gave them the ability to change any setting on their computer they want. Now it's going to change and swap back at night, every single night, and reharden their system. But sometimes they need the ability to make some changes. And so we give them the ability to do that, but it's just self-hardening. So it automatically undoes whatever it is they did to get that to work. So,
yep. Yeah, there's a lot that can be done if you sort of think outside the compliance box and look at it from the user's perspective. What is it that, how is this impacting the user? How is this impacting their ability to get their job done? Because their job is not security. Their job is whatever it is. So,
yeah. And I find that the rehardening stuff helpful myself, because I'll go into a client meeting, for example, and I'll try to cast, and all of a sudden realize, oh, my local firewall is blocking it, and so I'll poke a hole in it, and sure enough, that'll be blocked by the time I get back from the meeting and I'm done driving. So I think it can even be helpful for your cybersecurity people as well, because when we engineer things right, it's just easier.
Right. Absolutely.
Or hopefully anyway. All right. Well, hey, it's been an absolutely fabulous episode today. Thank you for joining us today, Michael.
Thank you, Joshua. I appreciate the opportunity.
All right. Have a great day, everyone. We'll see you again tomorrow for another
Take care.
episode.